That was Exit, and I am now joined by director Michael Fausti, who's going to hopefully tell us a bit more about the film. Michael, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, Andy. Big thanks first off for screening Exit for us. I mean,
Thank you for showing the film.
I mean, to be honest, yeah. Oh, go on.
No, no.
What I was going to say is, I mean, I don't think you can really overstate as an independent sort of film director how important, festivals are, because sort of without people like yourself, Andy, sort of showing our material, we don't really manage to sort of, get the kind of exposure that, the big majors do. So, thank you for sort of screening Exit.
Brilliant. Thank you for letting us screen the film. As I say, it's, without you guys, we would have a festival. So it works both ways. Exit, it's a pretty weird trip. Where did that come from?
Thank you.
Where did it come from? What's it all about?
I mean, I guess, really, my sort of big influence in terms of filmmaking is sort of surrealism. That's sort of, what I'm interested in, and that's sort of what I'm in, what I'm about. And I think that, all filmmakers, we sort of wear our influences on our sleeves, and no matter how much we often sort of try and get away from things, we inevitably kind of come back to telling the sort of tales which sort of turned us on to filmmaking in the first place. And for me, it was sort of people like Louis Buñuel and Maya Deren, and just their kind of almost sort of dream logic narratives, in which, a lot of the time I was never really 100% sure really what sort of certain symbols and sort of things like that meant. But I tried to bring that to Exit, and it's kind of one of those things that no matter how much I almost try and tell a story in a sort of, straightforward linear way, it always seems to develop its own life and go off into this sort of subconscious, dream world, which is kind of the territory of Exit, really. And as I say, the other big influence on me is 60s British cinema, which, of course, if you know anything about the 60s, that was a pretty trippy time.
Well, it definitely comes across in Exit. I've read it's Brexit, and it's obviously pretty obvious that it's Brexit inspired.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to sort of overstate that, because I mean, the kind of Brexit influence was really to do with the sort of time of writing Exit, in which Matt Bayliss, who wrote the script for Exit, wrote it back in, towards the end of sort of 2017 now, around about the time of the European election. And we'd actually been talking for a long time about sort of creating a film together. Matt had helped us with a number of sort of short films, like one we made called Dead Celebrities. Matt actually, was gracious enough to star in. And, I think anybody who makes a short film, you then have that inevitable kind of conversation of, can we make a feature? Would we be able to make a feature? And so we set ourselves a number of kind of, provisos for any sort of film that we could make. So firstly, we wanted it in a single location as much as possible to keep budget and costs down, a small ensemble cast. And ultimately, it had to be sort of set in Britain and quite sort of British in its sort of tone and outlook, simply because these are the resources we have. We can't replicate the streets of New York in North London, so we weren't going to try. And then, of course, inevitably, just Brexit's everywhere, and we're sort of writing this story. And Matt then hit upon this idea of, two couples, one French, one English, and the playing out of what I suppose I could describe as the British Island mentality, and just, setting it within a sort of horror thriller genre. But as I say, I mean, I don't want it just to be sort of seen as, it's a Brexit thriller or it's a Brexit horror movie, because the more we got into the writing and the filming of Exit, the more we kind of explored other things, such as, boundaries and sort of sexual desires and lusts, and, the kind of hang-ups that these people themselves bring to the house.
Yeah. Okay. So the title itself was that wasn't a play on words with Brexit. That was.
No, yeah. I mean, it is. It is a sort of play upon the idea of Brexit, but also it's a bit of a reference to the idea of sort of hell being other people. As I think was sort of first mentioned by Jean-Paul Sartre in his No Exit. So it is about, its first point of call is from obviously Brexit, but it's really that idea of entrapment which all of the characters in various ways in Exit are trapped. You know, everybody from the landlord who can never really leave, and you know, the man on the phone who's sort of trapped in the basement, to the kind of four couples who seem to be just stuck in this kind of loop, which there seems to be no exit from. Because, you know, I think as a number of sort of viewers have noticed, particularly if you view Exit more than once, there is you know, it's a circular narrative, and the idea of trying to find the way out from this kind of house is as much where the sort of titles comes from as opposed to, you know, including Brexit as well.
You mentioned it was a conscious decision to obviously limit the location and the number of actors. How did that work? Was it a quick shoot? How long were you shooting for?
I mean, so one of the ironies of Exit is that it was a quick shoot. You know, we did principal photography in 7 days. We had access to an apartment for 7 days, and we shot the majority of what you see on screen in those 7 days. We then shot our exteriors about sort of 2-3 months later, because I wanted the outside of the building to actually look more sort of kind of wintry and grey, in contrast to this Wizard of Oz world that you kind of go into in the apartment. I mean, it was you know, predominantly a budgetary consideration. You know, most sort of indie filmmakers, really, when you kind of look at sort of like, you know, independent movies, they're single location movies. They're often disguised single location movies, but really it's budget, because every time you have to move, that's time lost shooting.
Time and money,
So also with a small cast, you know, your costs do go down as well, and it means that you can work closer with your actors because you have to spend more time with them. I mean, you know, we're essentially making, I mean, sort of paraphrase Myra Derren, who I've sort of mentioned earlier. She said she made films for the cost that Hollywood spent on lipstick, and we're kind of working on the same sort of budget, really. You know, literally what we are sort of making our films for. You know, Christopher Nolan wouldn't even spend on coffee on one of his films. So, you know, things like, you know, shooting on location and just having one location is the way forward if you're trying to sort of do it, you know, on a very limited budget.
Good. You mentioned the cast. I've got quite a cast there. How did you get Tony Denham? How did that come about?
I mean, I've long been an admirer of sort of Tony's work, in, you know, stretching all the way back to In the Name of the Father and The Football Factory, and a lot of those movies like We Still Kill the Old Way. Really, it was via a kind of a friend who knew Tony, and we were kind of casting for, you know, the roles in Exit, and we had our kind of 4 principal characters, and I knew that I wanted somebody like Tony Denham. I wanted a kind of older, what I would say old-fashioned, you know, kind of Londoner, somebody who really had a bit of London grit about them, who would have that kind of persuasive, slightly sinister ability to persuade 2 complete couples to spend the night together. And I was chatting with someone, sort of saying, well, sort of friend of ours, Paul Cockgrove, who runs Horrorthon. He said, well, look, I know Tony Denham. Do you want me to have a word for you? And we were kind of like, oh God, yeah, all right. You know, we jumped to the chance, and to be honest with you, Tony was just a real joy to work with. I mean, just a consummate professional. You know, we sort of picked him up and brought him to the set, and literally he just flew through his lines, because, you know, he's got about 12 pages of dialogue, and we just shot it all in 1 day. It was our first day's filming, and, you know, we were feeling the pressure a bit, having sort of somebody of sort of Tony Denham's stature on set, but he literally just flew through it. You know,
I can imagine him just sort of just banging it out. Right, what do you want now? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it was just one thing after another, and he was, you know, just spot on it, just on everything, you know, just kind of like, you know, characterization and dialogue that, you know, we were just able to let him go and just sort of do his stuff. And it was a really nice sort of first day directing for me, because it was, you know, really went like a dream, and just, you know, he just sort of, as I say, flew through it. And, you know, I really was very happy with sort of Tony, and the kind of weight that he brings to the role.
Indeed,
And,
yeah.
No, I was really pleased with that.
Yeah. The aspect ratio.
Oh yeah.
What was the thinking behind that? Is that to appear more confined, or?
Yes, exactly. I mean, kind of, it's one of those things that, if you just watched Exit, or even indeed if you're kind of, about to start staring at your phone, you're looking at a 16:9 sort of ratio.
Yeah.
And literally everywhere we're looking now, it kind of follows that ratio. Your TV is this, your computer,
Everything,
your
yeah.
phone. And I think this kind of ignores another tool which is at the disposal of the filmmaker, which is aspect ratio. If you go back to the 1960s, when cinema is trying to compete with television, they made their movies bigger, which is where the sort of 16:9 and these kind of widescreens came from, to actually be in direct contrast to TV. But for Exit, I knew that I wanted, the old-fashioned sort of 4:3 ratio, simply because it's the ratio I grew up with. That was the shape of my TV growing up, and
Yeah.
and even when I was,
yeah.
sorry, say that again.
I feel you. I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even kind of sort of like older films that we were sort of watching on VHS tapes, they were all cropped to 4:3 anyway.
Yeah, or pan and stand, even worse. Yeah. Yes.
But I do have an affection for the sort of 4:3 ratio. It frames the human face, I think, a lot better than 16:9 does. You don't get that kind of, sort of looseness that you're seeing at the moment at the kind of edges. And because virtually everything in the flat, the apartment that we used for Exit, was square in shape, it was something I was sort of considering fairly early on, the use of a sort of 4:3 ratio to add to this kind of confinement. And so when we were blocking out shots and sort of like framing up how we wanted kind of our actors to appear, that 4:3 ratio was just a gift, because it just meant that everybody felt that much more on top of each other. I mean, it was a small flat anyway, but I think the sort of 4:3 ratio really adds to that kind of confinement, and also, sort of frames our actors sort of perfectly, really. But aspect ratio is something which was a sort of consideration sort of fairly early on.
All right. The biggest regret, obviously, we put a lot of work into this festival for this year, and the biggest regret is obviously we haven't got an audience. Or we've got an audience, but they're not going to be watching it together. We do what we do because we want people to see films on a big screen. That's what it's all about,
Yes.
and see it together. So I think the biggest regret, I think, is going virtual. Is we're not going to see a reaction. Obviously, Exit has played to a number of festivals already. How did it go down? What was the response?
We've had like a really sort of positive response, and I mean, I think that the thing that I hear the most, which to me is really humbling and really pleasing, is people say, I want to see it again. I really liked it, but I actually want to watch it again to sort of like puzzle out some of those things. Because sort of something I dislike about films is those films that kind of sort of point the audience in the direction that they should be thinking about particular characters, or sort of interpreting things for them. But I suppose the sort of the most positive reactions we've been having is wow, I really like that, but I want to watch it again, because I'm still not entirely sure.
Not sure what happened there. Yeah,
what actually happened there.
I've seen it twice, and I'm after this conversation, I'm thinking, I think I want to watch it again now. Yeah, it's a strange one, but it's good.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
In a good way, yeah. So I mean, the biggest reference I always see is David Lynchian. I see that every review going.
Yes. So, I mean, it has been said a number of times, and a lot of reviewers have sort of drawn attention to that. And I'll take that as a massive compliment, because sort of growing up in a sort of late 80s, early 90s, when I guess I was in my sort of late teens and early 20s, and starting to seek out some sort of left field cinema, coming across sort of David Lynch's work, it was just like, wow, I love this stuff, and this is the kind of stuff I want to make. And he's a big shadow, really, to try and sort of step out from. I think that if you are a fan of he's kind of, his method of filmmaking does kind of find its way into your work. I mean, Lynch, he is an influence, together with other kind of sort of, I suppose, what could be described as left field filmmakers. But yeah, I think the responses to Exit have been pretty positive, and I couldn't be happier, because this is our first feature, you know, and it's been a struggle to kind of get it to, you know, where it is now and get it to an audience, simply, you know, because, you know, I'm an indie filmmaker. I'm sort of fitting it around, you know, other responsibilities and, you know, a day job, and you're working with, you know, no money, and to then try and be kind of like getting this to, you know, a point of distribution is a struggle. And so every time we get a sort of positive review and feedback, I am, you know, incredibly appreciative, because, you know, you're putting yourself sort of forward in, you know, against people who are, you know, working with budgets in the millions. And so, you know, every sort of positive response that we get from an audience member is greatly appreciated.
Cool. You mentioned distribution. You've self-distributed the film yourself, is that right?
That's correct. I mean, to be honest with you, it's something that I'm sure everyone's aware of. We live in some pretty uncertain times, and you know, actually, we did go down. We spent sort of like, you know, the sort of first 6 months of lockdown, investigating and sort of pursuing distribution, and it's a tough time for everybody out there. And what we kind of came to the conclusion is, ultimately, you know, to be able to move forward and make our next film, which, you know, is always the goal as an indie filmmaker. You know, you want to kind of move forward to the next project. You know, you can't sort of stand still. We had to get some cash back, and, you know, we'd sunk our own money into Exit, and it was the kind of case of, well, you know, we need some money to be able to kind of, you know, make our next film. And so therefore, after much kind of sort of deliberation and research, and, you know, there are some great indie distributors out there, but we just kind of felt that, given the uncertainty of where we are, we needed some cash back. And so we are sort of self-distributing Exit. And, you know, even when you start looking into streaming services, and I'm not going to mention any names, indie filmmakers are not being served particularly well by some streaming services.
Yeah. There's not a lot of money, is it? It's a very low rate per hour.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, you know, one particular distributor, which I'm not going to, streaming service, which I'm not going to mention, is paying filmmakers, you know, 1 cent per hour of streaming.
Oh, wow,
if you, so just to kind of put it into context, if your movie shows for 8,000 hours, you know, you're going to get back, well, what's that, 80 quid? Well, not even that, you know, you're going to get back $80. So really, we just went down the route of, you know, we're going to go back to physical media, because, I mean, it's kind of interesting that I'm finding a lot of independent sort of movies are actually now going back to this. And don't believe it when people tell you that physical media is dead. You know, it's not. It's never going to be where it was. But there is a pretty healthy kind of demographic out there who are prepared to sort of pay for, you know, a sort of decently packaged Blu-ray. And that's why we went down that kind of route. You know, we've put together a sort of fairly decent package, and you know, we are actually seeing a sort of decent return, you know, on what we've produced.
So indie to the last then.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I've heard so many stories from filmmakers who thought they were getting a good deal from a distributor, and after 3-4 years down the line and seeing it play in cinemas and on TV, were still to see a single penny. And you just sort of think, wow, you know, we really were kind of quite mindful of that. So we did decide to produce our very own Blu-ray package, available from Fausti Films.
Is there a website for that?
There is a website. It is Fausti, Fausti films.com. And if you go to our shop link there, you'll be able to buy yourself a copy of Exit, which I just happen to have to hand. What are the odds of that, eh? That I'm doing an interview and I happen to have the Blu-ray there.
It's the way to do it. Michael,
yeah, shameless self-promotion.
No, yeah, go for it. That's what it's all about. What's next for you guys? What's the next one?
We're currently in pre-production on something, but I mean, to be honest with you, it's tricky. So, you know, we're working on various writing projects at the moment. We've been producing short films for about 4 or 5 years, and we're kind of looking to put together a kind of collection of short films. But ultimately we are on pre-production for something at the moment, but as with everybody, it is a case of wait and see. You know, we can't start casting, we can't start looking at locations because, you know, this time next year we could still be sitting here waiting for some sort of progress. But you know, we are going to keep making films in the similar vein to Exit. So if you like Exit, you know, do check us out on our socials, because you know, if you like it, we are planning to make a lot more in that kind of vein of what I suppose could be called art house horror or weirdo thriller.
Weirdo thriller. I like
Weirdo
that.
thriller. There you go. A new genre. Weirdo thriller director. But yeah, you know, we you know, I think possibly one thing that I think lockdown is showing people is if you watch enough of Netflix, you come to realize that you probably want something else rather than just true crime documentaries, and start seeking out some of the kind of strange stuff, which indeed you're playing, Andy, at Dead in Sudbury. You know, there's we are out there sort of like fighting against the majors to bring you some quality lowbrow and lo-fi entertainment.
That's the one. Michael, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure.
And thanks for obviously letting me screen the film. Good luck with anything you do next.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Andy. Bye.